liikmed, saadikud, daamid ja härrad. Tere tulemast traditsioonilisele Maailma Energeetika Nõukogu aasta alguse konverentsile. Tänase päeva teema on Eesti riigi energiastrateegia uuendamine. Teema valik on ajendatud sellest, et järgmisel aastal hakkab Majandusministeerium uuendama Eesti energiamajanduse arengukava. Meie omalt poolt WEC Eestis mõtlesime, et aitame riiki ja muudame selle diskussiooni sisukamaks ja kaasame kõik osapooled. Täna me olemegi siia kutsunud kokku kõik energeetikast huvitatud huvigrupid. Täna on meil 2 ettekannet kavas. Esimene ettekanne toimub Skype'i vahendusel, sellepärast et varasemalt välja reklaamitud peaesineja sattus ootamatult haiglasse ja teda asendab doktor Bogdani WEC-i peakontorist Londonist. Ja teise ettekande teevad Ene Ergma ja Ando Leppimann Majandusministeeriumist. Kavas on ka 2 paneeldiskussiooni. Esimene energiatarbijate, tootjate ja tarnijate osalusel, teises on Riigikogu erakonnad. Ja peale konverentsi on meil kavas täna kuuldud mõtted, probleemid ja küsimused kokku korjata ja teha 2 või 3 töögruppi, kus me siis kutsume uuesti huvigrupid kokku ja arutame läbi, mis on need teemad, millega meil on vaja arengukava uuendamisel arvestada. Aga nüüd on mul au paluda lavale Riigikogu esimees proua Ene Ergma. Palun.
Tere hommikust, head konverentsist osavõtjad. Iga riigi jaoks on energiamajanduse arengukava üks tähtsamaid strateegiadokumente. Energiamajandus kogu maailmas mõjutavad 2 põhilist tegurit. Esiteks kasvab energianõudlus ja seda eriti kiiresti arenevates suurriikides nagu Hiina, Brasiilia ja teisalt keskkonnaprobleemid, mis on eriti seotud fossiilsete kütuste kasutamisega. Arengukava ei saa olla dogma, vaid see on elav organism, mille seisukorda tuleb pidevalt analüüsida, et mitte maha jääda kiiresti muutuvast maailmas toimuvast. Seetõttu ma tervitan Maailma Energeetika Nõukogu Eesti komitee initsiatiivi Eesti energiamajanduse arengukava uuendamisel. Energeetika arengu sisukaks kavandamiseks on juba tarvis võimalikult informeeritud arutelu. Igalühel võib olla oma arvamus, kuid selleks, et terad sõkaldest eraldada, tuleb esmalt võimalikult objektiivselt hinnata tänast olukorda ja ka erinevate probleemide lahenduste realistlikkust. Ma tahaksin rõhutada just viimast aspekti, sest maailma kasvava energiavajaduse rahuldamiseks otsivad teadlased kogu maailmas lahendusi nii vanade tehnoloogiate täiustamise ja edasiarendamise vormis, kui ka täiesti uute tehnoloogiate kasutamisel võtmus. Kui millegisse palju panustatakse, siis tavaliselt ei jää ka tulemused tulemata, ent teaduses ei saa läbimurdet kindlalt ette planeerida. On ju hästi teada, et paljud suuravastused on maailma teadusloos tulnud võib-olla isegi pooljuhuslikult, midagi muud otsides või nii, et nende tähendust ja rakendusala on mõistetud alles tükk aega hiljem. Tahaksin siinjuures teile meelde tuletada juba klassikaks muutunud juhtumid. Kui 19. sajandil küsis Inglise varakantsler John Peel Faradaylt tema katsete kohta, mis sellest kasu on. Ja sai vastuseks, Sir, ühel heal päeval te panete selle maksu alla. Arvan, et 21. sajandi inimestel siin Eestis on viimane lause selgesti arusaada. Arutelu energiamajanduse arengukava üle peaks samuti sisaldama tõsist diskussiooni tuumaenergeetika perspektiivide üle Eestis. Ma ei arva, et me peaksime eeskujuks võtma Saksamaa. Kui me ei soovi aastate pärast jääda sõltuvusse gaasitorust, peab meil olema valmidus teha õigel ajal õigeid otsuseid. Tuumajaamu peljatakse, kuid me teame ka, et tuumaenergeetika ohutus sõltub eelkõige inimestest, nii nagu see on igal kõrgtehnoloogilisel suunal. Tehnoloogiliselt lahenduselt on iga uue põlvkonna tuumareaktorid järjest ohutumad. Samuti on põhjust loota, et lähemas tulevikus toimub tõesti läbimurret toormil põleval tuumareaktori realiseerimisel. Peatselt ootab meid Eestis kõik ees üks üpris suur muutus elektrimajanduses, üleminek avatud turule. Eesti riigi energiapoliitika üheks olulisemaks siiks on olnud elektrituru toimimiseks vajalike tingimuste loomine. Selleks on ehitatud ja ehitatakse välisühendusi Estlink 1 ja 2. Eestis tegutseb elektribörs Nord Pool ja samuti on Riigikogus arutusel elektrituruseaduse muudatused, mis turu täielikul avanemisel eelnevalt on tarvis vastu võtta. Elektroenergeetika osas tuleb mõistlikud sihid seada avatud elektrituru toimimise loogikat arvestades. Suletud elektriturul võib lõpmatult vaielda, kas energiamonopoli üks või teine samm või investeering on mõistlik või mitte. Avatud turg on olemuslikult teistsugune keskkond. Igaüks, kellel on hea idee, kuidas elektrit konkurentsivõimeliselt toota, on teretulnud sellega tegelema, mitte ainult kritiseerima. Energiapoliitika üks põhiülesandeid on tagada, et meil oleks jätkuvalt olemas turu toimimiseks ja arenguks vajalikud tingimused ehk teisisõnu keskkond, milles ettevõtted saavad konkureerida. Samas peame aru saama, et Euroopa Liidu idapiiril oleva riigina on meid ümbritsev tegelikkus selline, et näiteks kolmandate riikide tootjatel on Euroopa Liidu elektritootjate ees ebavõrdsed eelised. See on üks küsimus, mis meie turu pikaajalise toimimise ja energiasõltumatuse kindlustamiseks peab lahenduse saama. Ja siit jõuamegi keskkonna küsimuste juurde. Mina küsin, ma ei tea, võib-olla kõik teised siin teavad. Aga kas me teame siiski, mis tõeliselt mõjutab maailmas kliimamuutust? Kas me teame, kui palju Eestis seob süsihappegaasi taimestik võrreldes fossiilkütuste põletamisel ja looduslikul lagunemisel tekkiva süsihappegaasiga? Mul on hea meel, et viimase probleemiga on hakatud tegelema natuke teisel tasemel. Euroopa Kosmoseagentuuri nõndanimetatud PEX-programmi raames on Regio koos Tartu Ülikooli, Tartu Observatooriumi ja samuti Euroopa Kosmoseagentuuriga hakanud tegelema, et saada palju täpsem metoodika kasvuhoonegaaside mõõtmiseks ja siis me võime teaduspõhiselt anda vastused CO2 emissiooni suurusest Eestis. Ja lõpetuseks, reaalsed energiapoliitilise valikud tehes tuleb hoida silmad arengu osas lahti ja samas jääda maa peale. Loodan, et nii tänases kui ka järgnevates aruteludes energiamajanduse tulevikust võetakse vastu otsuseid, mis aitavad rahuliku südamega vaadata tulevikku. Selleks kõigile meile kindlat meelt ja head tahet otsustamiseks. Aitäh!
Suur tänu, proua Ergma, heade soovide ja mõtete eest. Eriti tahaksin proua Ergma sõnavõtust rõhutada kahte mõtet. Esiteks seda, et Eestis on võib-olla liiga palju seda, kuidas kritiseeritakse, et üks või teine energialiik ei ole hea. Et kõik on oodatud energiat tootma ja see ongi üks maailma energeetika nõukogu põhiseisukohtadest. Igasugune energialiik on hea, aga selle taga peavad olema analüüsid, kas ja kui palju seda saab kasutada. Aga nüüd peaks meil olema videoühendus Londoniga, kus Skype'is on kuuldel Majeed al Bogdani. Majeed on maailma energeetika nõukogu stsenaariumanalüüsi töörühma projektijuht. Ta on varasemalt töötanud Saudi Arambos, kus on olnud planeerimisosakonnas tööl. Ja täna räägib ta meile WEC-i uuringust transpordi arengustsenaariumid aastast 2020. Majeed, do you hear me?
Hello?
Oh,
yes,
hello.
good morning.
How are you?
Doing good, thank you. I wonder how can I share my screen with you guys?
Use this, share your desktop or share your slides.
I want to share my desktop with you.
Yeah. Just can you see us or not?
I can see the technician sitting on a chair.
Okay. There are about 200 people here listening and watching you. So, just a moment. And as long as you are setting up your slides, I will just say a few words why Carlos isn't here. Meie eelmine või välja reklaamitud esineja Dr. Carl Rose, endine Shaky peastrateeg, sattus eelmisel neljapäeval ootamatult haiglasse, mistõttu ta ei saanud kahjuks tulla ja nüüd oligi õnneks sai meile appi ja nõustus Londonis seda ettekannet tegema. I guess we also have slides here. Maybe we can show them from here. I guess we cannot hear you. Your voice isn't coming through. Now we can hear you.
Okay, good. I apologize for that. If you could direct the camera to the audience so I get to know whom am I addressing and relate more to you guys. All what I can see is just the gentleman sitting on the podium.
Sorry, that's all you can see, unfortunately. But maybe we can show your slides from here and then you can...
Yes, definitely you can show my slides from there. But I don't know which slide you are showing now.
We'll just put the first slide on. And then you can tell us when we need to change the slide.
Okay.
Now it's the first slide, introduction.
Can the gentleman direct the camera at least to the slides? It will be more interesting to relate to the material. If it's a laptop, can you just rotate it around? It would be better.
Just a moment.
Okay.
He's turning the screen right now.
Okay.
Now you should be able to see them.
Okay, well I figured out how I can share my screen, so I will flash my presentation from this end if that's okay with you gentlemen.
Okay. No, yeah, it's working, perfect.
Okay.
The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to be among you all today and present to you the recently completed World Energy Council study titled Global Transport Scenarios 2050. This study has been carried by the World Energy Council, coordinated from London, and has been completed in November last year and presented in the World Petroleum Congress in Qatar, December 8th last year. For the rest of this presentation, I will share with you the study goals and approach, and I will go over a very short overview of the global transport market. This will set the ground for the rest of the presentation. I will also go over the drivers and the critical uncertainties that the team has went through to arrive at the scenarios that I will be sharing with you at a later stage today. I will also share with you the modeling results and then wrap up with a brief summary and key takeaway messages. Ladies and gentlemen, the global transport sector over the next 40 years will witness a few unprecedented challenges related to the population, urbanization, and so on. We expect the world population to increase by another 2.3 billion people, reaching the neighborhood of around 9.3 billion people by 2050. And we expect more than 2/3 of those people to live in cities. We also expect the number of cars, trucks, volume of travel and freight, in addition to the fuel consumption, to more than double. This is not to mention the challenges involved with the emissions, health problems, congestion, and noise. These challenges are compounded by uncertainties arising from government interventions and regulation, uncertainties arising from regional and global cooperation and integration, in addition to uncertain economic situations around the globe and unexpected technologies breakthroughs. In light of these challenges and uncertainties, the World Energy Council in London has recognized the world's need to have transparent, robust global transport scenarios that reflect the potential developments in transport fuels, technologies, and systems through 2050. In order to achieve this goal, WEC has assembled a study team of 54 experts from 29 countries, and the team has went through the World Energy Council's completed an ongoing database of case studies and quantified examples, investigating the available and emerging technologies and fuels. The team has also conducted regional workshops wherein they gathered regional inputs specific to the different parts of the world, and it's worth mentioning that we've conducted six different workshops gathering specific regional messages related to energy in general and transportation in specific. The team then had combined what they have learned from the case studies and what they have gathered in regional messages into two distinct transport scenarios, and I will be explaining and describing these two scenarios for you in a few slides. They also translated these two scenarios into numeric assumptions and fit them into a model that was developed jointly with Paul Scherrer Institute based in Switzerland for quantification purposes. Now, before we move on with the presentation, I'll give you a brief overview of the global transport. I know some of you are experts in transport, but maybe the general audience are not. In 2010, the global transport sector consumed around 2.2 billion ton of oil equivalent. That was around 19% of the global energy supplies. And as the left-hand side pie chart shows, around 96% of the transport fuels came from oil origin. That is to say, gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, and residual fuel oil. In fact, these four major oil derivatives, they came from oil origin, which constituted around 62% of the global oil production. And this is very important sector to the major oil producers. I heard the gentleman introducing Saudi Aramco. I think he was introducing me, but nevertheless. As the right-hand side pie chart shows, around 76% of the transport sector was road transport. That's light duty vehicles, trucks, and buses. It's worth mentioning that around 1 billion cars and trucks were in circulation in 2010. Looking at this map that represents the energy use, we can see darker red colors represent high energy use in metric ton of oil equivalent per 1,000 people. And we can see that the darker the color is the higher energy use. Now we can see the OECD countries, they have the largest energy use, while developing, especially South Asia and Deep Africa, are the smallest energy users in the world. This map also shows that the non-Europe, OECD, Russia and Middle East, they are heavily dependent on gasoline, while OECD, Europe, China and Africa are heavily dependent on diesel. Now, with this background and with what I've described earlier, the transport study team investigated and evaluated 11 major drivers that thought will shape up the future of transport over the next 40 years. We can see the 11 drivers on the left-hand side of this screen. And these drivers, they range from highly predictable drivers, such as the economic growth and demographic trends, that eventually affect the megacities and urbanization, to few highly unpredictable drivers, such as various governments' policies and regulations, lifestyle changes, and alternative fuels and fuel efficiency breakthroughs. We recognize the first three factors to be major drivers, and these drivers will be constrained by the dynamics of the geopolitics, the access to global reserves and supplies, environmental and health concerns. And in response to these drivers and constraints, we expect governments to respond with various policies and regulations. We expect consumers to alter their lifestyle and maybe producers and car manufacturers to start improving fuel efficiencies and coming up with innovative technologies. These major drivers are compounded by the complexity of critical uncertainties, which we talked about earlier, and that includes the government regulations and intervention, in addition to regional and global cooperation and integration. With these drivers and uncertainties, the team has arrived and described two distinct scenarios. And I will not get into the details and describe these scenarios in details, but the gist of it is that we have two scenarios. One is called freeway, and the other one is called tollway. The main difference between the two is that in the freeway, we believe that the free market will take over and will the forces of the free market will prevail and will create the global competition, minimum role of the government in shaping up the market, coming up with the regulations and dictating what technologies and what fuels to consume, when and where. On the other hand, we have a tollway scenario whereby we think governments will step in and will decide what technologies to adopt and use, and we expect the markets are more regulated. We've used 50 different criteria to distinguish or compare and contrast the two scenarios, and we've described them fully in 62-page report, and you can access it at worldenergy.org. With these two scenarios, I will share with you the results over the next few slides. We start with the number of vehicles, light-duty vehicles specifically, as they constitute more than half of the transport market. In these three pie charts, I would like to draw your attention to the very left one, which described the market in 2010. And in 2010, we see that 98% of the market was conventional internal combustion engine vehicles. Around 1% was liquid hybrid, that's gasoline and diesel, and the remaining 1% was gas combustion engines, either conventional or hybrid, very small number of plug-ins and EVs. In the freeway 2050 scenario, we expect that the conventional ICE EVs share will drop to 78%. The balance will be picked up by the liquid hybrids, which will represent the highest growth, that's gasoline and diesel, and the gas vehicles will pick up around 7% of the market share. We expect the plug-ins and EVs to capture around 5% of the market. Moving into the tollway 2050 scenario, the picture is a little bit more colorful, and we see a further drop of the conventional ICE EVs and a significant increase in the plug-ins and EVs from 5% to 34%. The gas combustion engines will consume around 8%, and the liquid hybrids will consume around 26%. Looking into the numbers of vehicles, we see from the left-hand side chart that the number of vehicles is most probably will increase from 210 million vehicles in 2010, we are talking about light-duty vehicles, to a number between 1.7 to 2.1 billion vehicles by 2050. And again, this depends on this scenario that we are describing. The lower red dotted line describes the tollway scenario, while the blue line describes the more freeway scenario. Looking into the OECD versus non-OECD, from the right-hand side graph, we see the bulk, if not most, of the growth will come from non-OECD market. We see the non-OECD number of vehicles will increase by around 4 to 5.6 times, while the OECD countries will increase by only 36 to 41 at max %. I want to add to this slide that the light-duty vehicles fuel demand share will drop from a current level of 52% of the market to a neighborhood of 30 to 37%. The remaining will be picked up by trucking, ships, and airplanes. Now moving into the fuel consumption, we see that the fuel demand is expected to increase by 30 to 82% over the course of the next 40 years. This increase is mainly coming from gasoline, diesel, fuel, and fuel oil and jet fuel. And we can see from the right-hand side that these four major fuels will increase by 10 to 68%. That is from a level of around 53 million barrels a day in 2010 to a number between 58 and 89 million barrels in 2050. Diving into these three fuels specifically, we see that the gasoline market is expected to shrink by 16 to 63%, while the market of diesel and fuel oil will increase by 46% to almost 203%. The jet fuel witnesses the highest growth rate of 225% in the tollway to a number of the magnitude of 327% increase. These are the conventional fuels. We expect also the biofuels to increase by around 4 times, and this matches the conclusion that we've arrived at in our Latin American workshop. Our friends in Petrobras and Brazil They are expecting 2 to 3 times production capacity increase over the next 40 years at max. Other fuels, which includes electricity, natural gas, and hydrogen, are expected to increase by 6 to 7 times over the next 40 years. It's worth mentioning that the 4 major fossil fuel derivatives, gasoline, diesel fuel, and jet fuel, share will drop from a current level of around 97% of the market to 80 to 88% of the market. That is to say that the transport market will still depend heavily on crude oil derivatives. Dividing the picture of OECD versus non-OECD, this slide shows that the total fuel consumption in the transport sector in exajoules, and again we represented that in exajoules because we have electricity, we have hydrogen, gas, and oil. We expect the non-OECD to increase by 2 to 3 times, while the OECD consumption is expected to shrink by up to 20%, depending on the scenario that we are talking about. Looking into the fuel demand in cars specifically, we see that the non-OECD consumption will increase by 96% to 355%, while the OECD is expected to shrink. Remember, the LDV market is shrinking in worldwide. Again, the consumption is coming from the non-OECD countries. Looking into the emission, which will result as you consume more, you will definitely emit more. We expect the CO2 emission to increase by 16 to 79% over the next 40 years. I'd like to remind you that the CO2 emission from the transport sector is around 23% of the global emission. That's around a quarter, so 75% of the emission is coming from other sectors, industrial, residential, and others. The emission from cars is expected to increase by at max 35%, or it could drop in by 46%, depending on the government policy. Again, before we leave this slide, and again stressing on the CO2 emission from cars, we expect the emission from cars to drop from a current level of 42% out of the total transport system to a number between 19 and 31%. Dividing that by OECD versus non-OECD, we see that most, if not all, of the emission will come from non-OECD, and that is because they will be the major consumers, or the additional consumptions will be coming from the non-OECD, and therefore emission follows. For cars, we see that the non-OECD emission from cars will increase by 47 to 323%, while the OECD emission is expected to drop by 30 to 80%. Summarizing these slides, I think I got my screen stuck here. We have seen from the results that I've just shared with you that the total fuel demand on a global level is most likely will increase by 30 to 82%. And we have seen that most of that increase will still heavily depend on the gasoline, diesel, fuel oil, and jet fuel. We've seen these 4 major fuels, their share of the total transport fuel market is expected to drop from 97% to a number between 80 and 88%. We have seen the number of cars is most likely more than double, 2.2 to 2.6 times. And the share of the light-duty vehicles is expected to drop from a current level of 52 to 30 to 37% of the market. The CO2 emission from the global transport market is expected to increase. As we consume more, we will emit about 16 to 79% more. Again, this is 1/4 of the global CO2 emission coming from the transportation. The light-duty vehicles emissions is expected to be 19 to 31% of the total transport market CO2 emission. I guess the takeaway messages is that the future of transport will heavily depend on government policies, and we have seen that from the 2 scenarios that we have described. We also have learned that the major demand will shift mainly to the developing countries, and we expect by the year 2025 or so, the non-OECD will take over the OECD in terms of number of cars, transport volumes, and transport fuel consumption. We also learned that the global transport will still heavily depend on crude and fossil fuels. They will still constitute 80 to 88%. And we have seen that the government regulations is definitely needed, not only to develop the infrastructures and technologies required for the next 40 years, but also to reduce the externalities related to CO2 emissions or greenhouse gas emissions in general, congestion problems, noise, and fatalities. I would like to remind you at this point that we have not got into any policy recommendations or implications as it lied outside the scope of the study, and our constituents, which is our country members in their terms of references for this transport study, they've told us to look into the technologies and fuels and map out the 2 scenarios or however many scenarios we needed to, and come up with a clear, robust, plausible picture of the next 40 years in the transport. Our plan is to carry these results and come up maybe with policy recommendations and implications on refiners, car manufacturers, and consumers, definitely. This concludes my presentation, and I thank you so much for listening. Thank you. Back to you, Harvey.
Thank you, Majeed. I'd like you to stay on the line because I'm sure we have questions from the audience. As people are thinking the questions, I'll ask you some myself.
Okay.
At first, did you also look at the prospects of oil shale and shale oil in your study? Or any unconventional fuels? What's the future of unconventional fuels?
Yes, we indeed did look into that. I'm looking into a paper that I was reading today. As you can see, or as you will see in our study, which we post online, the gas or the number of cars in burning gas is expected to capture 6 to 8% of the market, right? And in terms of the fuels, they will consume around 5 to 8% of the total transport fuels. This indicates that they will significantly grow over the next 40 years. And the reason behind that is the shale gas development in the US and most probably in Europe and China. So we've looked into unconventional sources of energy. In terms of shale oil, it will feed into the supply of oil. Remember, when you refine it, at the end you see diesel, gasoline, jet fuel, and fuel oil. So it doesn't matter whether the oil is coming from conventional or unconventional, the market will be very well supplied with gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, and fuel oil. In terms of unconventional gas related, yes, we've considered that, and you can see that in the result. As a matter of fact, we see most of the growth in natural gas burning engines, whether conventional or hybrid, coming from the US and China.
Okay, thank you. I just skip to Estonia for a bit, but we'll have more questions.
Yes, please.
Kui kellelgi on küsimusi, kes soovib eesti keeles küsida, siis palun küsige, ma tõlgin need inglise keelde, et kui kellelgi on küsimusi. And now back to you. Another question I had was that you used to work for Saudi Aramco, right?
I used to, yes.
Yes, and I was thinking, is today's oil price too high for Saudi Aramco, or is it too low? What's the oil price they want? Is 100 good price for them?
I cannot comment on the positions of Saudi Aramco or Saudi Arabia. I'm wearing the World Energy Council's hat, and I'm not authorized or in place or empowered to comment about the Saudi policy or opinion. I can tell you my own opinion, being a World Energy Council employee. I read in the paper just like the rest of you do. Mr. Ali Naimi, he was in the news 2 days ago, and he was, yesterday, and he was saying that the market, and I believe what he said, I strongly believe that the market will be very well supplied in terms of oil. I think Saudi Arabia has the capacity and the will to provide the market and make sure that the consumers get the oil that they need to run their economies. He mentioned a number of $100 a barrel, and that is pretty much what the oil market has been hovering around over the last few months. I just read, just like the rest of you guys, that Saudi Arabia is a very reliable supplier, and I believe it is. I also read that the Naimi is saying that $100 a barrel is a good price for Saudi, and I believe it's a reasonable price. They were talking of a band of $70 to $80 a barrel. Now maybe the number is 100. Again, as an economist, I strongly believe in unconventional supplies and alternative technologies, and I think the higher the consumption, we are moving up the supply curve. And I think if the price is too high, then alternatives will prove wrong and will bring the price down. It's a matter of that very marginal oil barrel we take into the market, bringing pretty much the whole market down.
Thank you. Very, very thorough answer. I just go back to the audience. Are there some questions? Küsimusi? Mikrofon on seal, kui... Okay, it seems there aren't any from the audience. So, I just thought of one more question. If you would have to say in just one sentence, what's the key takeaway from your presentation?
Take away?
Yes, the key takeaway. One sentence.
Well, it will be very hard to pick up which message I want to stress on more, but the message is that probably the transport market will remain heavily dependent on fossil fuels.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I wish you the best for the rest of your gathering, and I apologize for the glitches and minor problems that we had with the IT. It's always difficult to address an audience that you cannot physically and visually see. So thank you so much for it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kui keegi mõtles, et miks me valisime just transpordiuuringu selleks, mida me teile siin täna tutvustasime, siis põhjus on väga lihtne. Et transport on sektor, mis mõjutab igat ühte. Toitu on vaja transportida, me kasutame ühistransporti, me sõidame autoga. Ja samas on see üks valdkond, mis on Eesti energiamajanduse arengukavas, ütleme, natukene vähem käsitletud kui mõni teine. Nii et see oli see põhjus, miks me võtsime just transpordi, sest transport on väga oluline valdkond energiamajanduse arengukavas. Ja meil on siin veel üks tabel, kuhu me tänase konverentsi jooksul korjame mõtteid, mis on energiamajanduse arengukavas hästi, mis vajaks natuke muutmist. Et kas me saame selle praegu veel tühja tabeli korraks siia seina peale? Et läheb natuke hetk aega. Aga meie eesmärk on see, et me tänase päeva jooksul kuuleme siin kindlasti palju mõtteid, mis meil on hästi arengukavas, mida me tahame muuta. Ja siia tabelisse me korjame need konverentsi jooksul kokku ja konverentsi lõpuks on meil ideaaljuhul valmis niisugune dokument, mille pealt me saamegi edasist diskussiooni jätkata. Et ma näen, et täna me oleme siia juba kirja saanud, et Energia majanduse arengukavasse on vaja tõsist diskussiooni, me peame rääkima tuumaenergiast ja transpordist. Et loodetavasti me saame varsti selle teemasid, mis meil täna juba hästi, aga sellega me töötamegi. Nii, ja lähme oma päevakavas edasi. Päevakava järgmine punkt on paneeldiskussioon, kuhu me oleme kutsunud energiatarbijad, energiatootjad ja tarnijad. Energiatootjad esindab meil Sandor Liive, Eesti Energia juhatuse esimees. Energiatarnijaid esindab Toomas Saks, Eesti Õliliidu juht. ja tarbijate huvidest räägib Arvi Hamburg, Eesti Teaduste Akadeemia energeetika.
Kas ma tohiks küsimuse ikkagi?
Tohib.
Kõiki neid meil väga hästi. Ja nüüd Hamburgis on tahtnud üks juht, et seda nüüd tarbijaks oleks nagu naermine meile natukene. Ja mul on ettepanek selline, sellepärast, et meil toimus pühapäeval Eesti Omanike Keskliidu kongress. Mul oleks 1400 inimest, meesindab mul 60 000 tarbijat. Ja mul on ettepanek ikkagi ka 5 tooli seal, ikka tõsine tarbija ka kutsuda. Ja mul on ettepanek meie Omanike Keskliidu kirjurõppon Peet Siita, 5. sinna kutsuda, et vähemalt üks tarbija oleks, aga muidu ta on midagi välja.
Aga palun.
Kõik on ju tegelikult tootjad sealt edasi.
Aga palun. Väga meeldiv pakkumine, me oleme sellega täiesti nõus.
Ega ma pole temaga kokku leppinud Siita, mida muidu peale.